Hello, welcome to Amtgard Leadership University. This is our, fourth panel on the history of Amtgard. So I'm really grateful to all of you for coming out here. A lot of names that I've read about and never met. I'm TyeDye, I'm going to be moderating. So if we could begin, if you guys could just go kind of through, introduce yourself, introduce how long you've been playing Amtgard, and kind of, I know not all of you have played all the way through, so kind of when you played.
Nashomi, probably the first 10 years of the club I was very active, and then kind of started fading out at that time. Career took over, but that was first 10 years. Yeah.
My name's Heimdale. Pretty much the same when I came back till probably 96. And really stopped after that.
Tawnee Dark Falcon. I was there on day one. I played pretty much every single week. Traveled to pretty much every out-of-town event within reach up until about 11th year. And mostly politics caused me to quit. I have come in and out and gone to special events and stuff since then, but I have not been a regular player.
Raphael, I started it in 1988 and was in Burning Lands up until 2006, and then went to Minnesota. I've been under the Iron Mountains and Rising Lands since.
So how did you all first find Amtgard? Tawnee, you mentioned that you were there the first day, but for the rest of you, and what did you think when you first saw, it wasn't really a thing back then, so what was your first impression of those people in the park?
Well, I'll tell you how I first found Amtgard. We had some friends of mine and I had a club, science fiction club called the StarQuest Science Fiction Club. And one of the members was a newspaper reporter. And I had been costuming long before Amtgard in the science fiction convention scene. She brought a flyer that some strange guy had dropped off at the newspaper asking them to print, which they weren't going to print a flyer, for this Attila the Hun's birthday bash. A copy of which is on the table outside the Amtgard history tent. I had just finished making a new costume, and I said, oh look, it's an opportunity to wear my new costume. Let's all go to this event. And that costume is hanging out there too, it's a leather tunic. And so we went, and we were the only people who showed up. And then the next week, more people started showing up. But so I tell people that leather tunic is why Amtgard exists. Because if I didn't have a new costume, we wouldn't have gone to the event, nobody would have shown up.
Could you guys all try and be a little louder? Some people in the back can't quite hear.
Sure.
Heimdale and I, Heimdale was still senior in high school?
No, I was a sophomore in high school.
Sophomore in high school?
Yeah.
Was I a senior?
You were a junior.
No, I'm 2 years.
Anyway,
so we're in high school, we're looking for something to do, we've got driver's license, and we were beating up on each other pretty regularly on the weekends just for the heck of it. And then we saw a flyer, I can't remember which flyer it was. I don't think it was Attila the Huns, but there was a flyer for Amtgard, and we're like, oh, let's go beat on somebody else for the weekend.
it was the Desert Siege Battle on Avenue of the Americas out when East El Paso was nothing but desert. And he drugged me off. He was really excited about doing this. And I get there and I'm sitting in the back of this truck watching these idiots run around in the heat with sticks, broom handles and whatnot, whacking at each other. And I just thought, this is the most retarded thing I've ever seen in my entire life. And it was so addictive that it was, 20, 30 minutes in, you're just like, this is all you want to do.
If you've ever seen the original Amtgard weapons, they were kind of like out of the anime cartoons. Some guy had an axe head that was just that huge, and he's running around, and I mean the swords were huge. Mm-hmm. It was quite crazy back then.
The average
Not a lot
sword
of skill,
was
a lot
4
of
feet
brute
long.
force, a lot of running around.
It's amazing how much our parents, to some extent, put up with us tearing up furniture and raiding where'd the shovel go? Because the shovel handle's missing, and your mother's asking what happened to the broom. We'll get you a new one because we needed it for a weapon core. Tandy Leather at the time must have just loved us because that's all we did was go in there to buy stuff, to make stuff. It was so much fun.
I started 2 or 3 weeks after my brother did. My brother was in high school and he saw a rule book fall out of a guy's backpack. And my brother got hooked the first week. By the third or fourth week, he had my brother's search warrant, now in the CK. My brother had a shield that he stole from mom's garbage can, the lid. He had a tunic, and I just happened to go with her when she went to pick him up, and there I am, little 12-year-old kid in the back seat, and I see 2 golden lions walking off the hill. One is exactly my age, one of them's tall, Adonis-shaped Klingon-looking dude, and they're wearing what I thought was the most awesome toot tabards ever. And then I got out and I saw what the Claw Legion looked like and Star Questing Dragons. Like, wow, I want to do this too. My brother threw a fit because he didn't want his little brother to do what he's doing, and the rest is history.
So how quickly did, like you mentioned the early weapons, how quickly did those standards change to something safer? How quickly did things change in general in those early years?
Well,
Slow.
it's important to note that for the first about 6 months of the club, more than half the members were female. And so hitting wasn't as hard as it is now. And the idea of sloughing shots, it hadn't really come upon us yet. If you got hit, you took it. So we broke a lot of cores because we were using inferior cores. But we did not break cores because we were hitting people hard. People did not get injured by the weapons. They got injured by the park. And the little bridge. There's an old saying in the Burning Lands, you're not a Burning Lander till you've given an ounce of flesh to the little bridge. So, but there was a notable day about, y'all were playing, it was like maybe 2 months in, when we were trying out these new, some kind of metal cores, but they were soft. So it was like a cartoon. You'd hit somebody, and your sword would take on their shape. So you had to throw your sword down and step up and down on it before the next opponent came so that you could jump up and fight with them. So it was, you know, there was a lot of joy in it that I haven't seen in a long time in the game. So.
One side note, closed cell foam wasn't really popular at that time. It was just beginning to be invented. So all we had was open cell foam. I mean, so most weapons had a huge foam sheath to it. My first sword was actually, the sheath for my sword was one of my pant legs I'd ripped off and just put over it. But so there was no closed cell foam until several years after the club had gotten started.
And where we first got it was camping mats.
Yeah. So as the foam technology actually evolved, that's when you started seeing those weapons shrink quite a bit. And then as PVC pipe got stronger, it shifted to that, and then some of the other cores started getting, so it literally evolved with the technology of what was available.
Good point.
It was an evolutionary process. You know, you're starting off with, you've got a rule book with a picture in it, and you're trying to interpret, what do I have available that I can utilize to make something that's functional for our use? We went through PVC, sticking it in the oven to make battle axes out of, to make sword hilts out of. Just, you're always looking for something new, something to push the boundary, something to make you more competitive, to give you an edge. And it was literally year to year, you would see these advancements.
One of the biggest jumps we had in technology was actually discovering Pier 1 sold bamboo.
Yeah.
Bamboo.
Yeah.
Because that was a lot more sturdy than actually PVC. So for a while, you'll see everything being made out of inch bamboo.
Yeah.
And also finding materials that were both strong enough and safe enough to realize your vision, that would still survive on the battlefield. You had an idea of what you want your weapon to look at like, but trying to make that out of the materials that were available at the time. We used to use counterweights. The weapons were very heavy because it was yellow foam and very big. So we put counterweights in the pommel, and my last counterweighted sword, the piece of metal that I took out of the pommel said Boeing on it. It was a piece of an airplane.
And I came in about the time where, you know, closed cell foam was making its introduction, and the only way you could actually do it, and this is where we were lucky, is El Paso's a military city, and if you were lucky to go to the Army surplus store, the GIs were selling their camp pads, and that was what we used. It was durable and it was great. And by like the by 99, or not 99, excuse me, 89, 90, you actually had like the first successful flat blades. Because if you see the old pictures, it's like the anime stuff, big bopper things. But Neas and Ahira, they basically worked on what was the first successful prototype of a flat blade that lasted a couple of years. And then later on, Farrar and Ahira and Neas ended up coming up with the standard of what a flat blade looks like and is constructed. And that rings true today unless you buy a noodle thing.
So that's the weapon tech. What about garb? How did garb change? How do you feel looking out at the garb today?
I feel like it's actually pretty similar. There's always been a pretty wide range of skill, capability, and garbing in the Burning Lands. I think Gwen was probably the best garber we ever had. She could make a sewing machine sing. Still, the tunic that I wear when I'm going to fight is a tunic that I won in a tournament that she made. But when I look out at the garb today, it looks basically exactly like the garb I would have expected about 3 years in. It took us a little while. We had to go to the SCA to learn how garb is supposed to look. We came from a costuming background. So our stuff tended to be flimsy and dressy and fancy. And so it took us a little while to learn trigger cloth, really sewing stuff down, double seams.
Heat bond and under. We didn't use that at the beginning.
Yeah.
So you had people who were using hem tape and they would like piece it out, or Gwen knew other methods to do. But once heat bond and under became easily available, all of a sudden the garbing became easier. We didn't have computerized embroidery machines to do stuff, so you do it by hand. And
we also didn't have the internet.
you had SCA modules that you acquired.
You went to the SCA, you went to the library.
So we've covered weapons and garb. What about the rules? I know they changed a lot more in the early years. What was that process like? Were any of you involved in it? What do you feel about the rule book today?
I don't like the current one.
It's too damn complicated.
I just don't like it that I can't use my weapon of choice for my class of choice anymore. But the very first rule book, which I looked and looked, I've got a bunch of them and I could not find a copy of it. But the very first rule book had a lot of untenable stuff in it. Stuff like the Order of the Chicken, which if you received it, you could never be knighted in the club. Like pretty much week 2, we said we're not going to play with this. You have to bear in mind that Amtgard was founded by Sir Peter LeGroux, a currently mentally ill homeless person who abandoned the club about 4 weeks in. We were orphaned after the first month, and we had to make our own way. We had to make it all up as we went along, with SCA to look up to as an older step sibling. The first rulebook rewrite, I can actually tell you the date of it, but there was a big political fracture in the club between one group of people and our group of people. We won, we're sitting here. And we were supposed to all go camping up in Cloudcroft for Thanksgiving weekend. And this opposing political group had a Sunday group that never met any of us. They were playing in a separate park. And they basically tried to stage a hostile takeover of the club on a weekend when they thought we were going to be out of town. And the weather turned bad, so we didn't go out of town. We showed up at Amtgard. Actually, we heard rumors in advance. So they showed up with a new rule book. And some of the things in this rule book was that one of their members was Pooh-Bah, which was the equivalent of Prime Minister for life. That knighthood was 6 months long. That no one under the age of 18 could participate in the club in any faction, that men and women had to fight separately. He didn't like being beaten by girls. He also came with a petition signed by the members of this Sunday group, throwing Nashomi and I, who were like really the people holding the club together, throwing Nashomi and I out of the club, which for the rest of my life, it will astonish me that someone would sign a petition throwing people that they didn't know out of a club that they'd never been to. I can't imagine how someone could bring themselves to sign that piece of paper. Anyway, Nashomi and Gilos and Joella had put together another rule book because they heard about this rule book that was coming out. And we went to all the homes of the Corsairs because at the time there were 40 Corsairs and 40 of everybody else. So getting the Corsairs on board was the key to holding the club together at any time. And the Corsairs, they were rough and tough, but they really, really believed in knighthood, in honor, in the things that the club stood for. They were, I think, in many ways, they were truest to the central idea of Amtgard. And so we went to their homes and we said, this is the new rule book that we're proposing. This is what's going on. We'd like your support. So we got out to the club an hour before the opposing faction. Everyone already liked the new rule book and they just didn't have any traction at all. So they basically all just quit right there that week.
I was mentioning to somebody outside earlier, this was actually quite a feat because this is pre-computer time. That second rule book was all hand typed within a week. Each of us had different sections, and there was a lot of frantic typing from non-typists trying to get this thing built.
And they had maintained a lot of the good parts of the original rule book. About 2 years later, I guess the internet started, and we discovered that there was a club called Dagger here, and that our rule book had been lifted from their rule book, our first rule book. So we immediately set about taking all the Dagger here elements out of our rule book, and I was queen at the time or something. I was in office, and maybe I was the BOD chair. And anyway, so I wrote the Dagger here Corporation a letter explaining what had happened, apologizing for having plagiarized them for all this time, and letting them know that we were going to immediately change our rules to remove the copyrighted material. And they wrote back a very nice letter. They said that they weren't unhappy at all, and at any time that we would like to become Dagger here instead of Amtgard, we were welcome to change over.
So, did you ever see Amtgard, or really at what point? Because if you were in 10 years, Amtgard was pretty established at that point. At what point did you realize this was going to become an international game?
Dallas.
Well, no, it was fairly early because we're Burning Lands is got a military base right there, and guys were getting rotated it out, and then they'd write us back that they had started a group here. I think when I first heard that somebody was doing it in Okinawa, I was like, okay.
On an aircraft carrier. We had a shire on an aircraft carrier.
So, it broke out pretty fast. Once we got through those initial 3 or 4 years, those first 3 years was really volatile. It could vary from, 10 people showing up to 100, and it was just kind of up and down. And then once we got through those rough years, it shot out. And so I think when I heard Okinawa, I was like, that's impressive.
When I saw the rule book, parts of which I had written, translated into Croatian. I'm like, somebody has translated things that I wrote into Croatian. That was, for me, I think one of the most amazing days in Amtgard was, Baraduin was the first Amtgard outside of the Burning Lands. And when we went down to one of their events and they had 40 some odd people on the field, remember, I was in Amtgard from the beginning. So when I took the field against Baraduin, it was the first time I'd ever fought anyone I didn't know. Everyone else in the club I had fought with from their first day. So going out and fighting experienced opponents that I didn't know at all, what their style was, who they were, what they were like, it was like stepping into an alternate dimension.
So
what were early events like? Like the first clan, what was that like?
It was a leaky tent.
I had the tent. I got it from my grandparents, and we were sneaking up for the weekend. I forgot the poles. So we had this big tent, no
sticks.
poles. And
Nobody brought sleeping bags. We didn't know it got cold up here at night.
Yeah, it was, and it was in that sleepy grass campground right outside of Cloudcroft. And back then it was really overgrown, but it was.
So we had our weapons, our garb, and a tent with no poles.
How many people were there?
12, 13.
Yeah, it was like a dozen. Most of us were all crammed in and kind of dogpiled in that tent. Somebody holding
Was
up
that
the
or freeze
roof
to
at
death?
night.
So I'd like to go through each of you in order. what would you say the most defining moment in Amtgard has been?
For the club overall or for us as individuals?
The club overall. You look like you have your hand raised.
I'm trying to. All right, I'll go with this weapon tech. Early 90s, kite spar. That's when all of a sudden you had some guy in Denver who decided to try that as a core, and all of a sudden he was Moses coming down from the mountain, and all of a sudden that was the core to use, and we still use it today. So that kind of technology, it's amazing. And then all of a sudden, you had for years the bridge from El Paso to Iron Mountains that was just fantastic. If we needed to get something done, I mean, the politics between those two kingdoms got a lot done. I mean, in 1998, we had a one-off Renaissance fair in El Paso, and originally the SEA was contacted for this, and the SEA said, well, what are you going to pay us for it? We don't know. I don't think we're going to. And they said no. And they reached out to Burning Lands, and we went to 2 meetings with all these people. Like, everybody's in suits, and we showed up in garb. And at the end of the first meeting, the lady said, oh, by the way, we set aside $3,000 for you. Is that fair? We're like, yes. And next thing you know, like, Aaron Mithras had some good contacts in Iron Mountains, and some of the guys there, they worked in a foundry, and they were crafting their own weapons,
Rift.
medallions and stuff. Yeah, Rift and Kane. And they were invited. They were just given a merchant's booth for free. But we made a deal with kingdoms, duchies, and baronies that if you brought people, we would give you part of our money according to the size of your group. And we knocked it out of the park. We ended up pocketing about $2,000, and that helped make Clan better, more profitable every year after that. We spent a lot more money to make a lot more. And Iron Mountains guys were happy to just come down. They sold a lot of their old stock that was just collecting dust in there, and it was an amazing time. 2 years later, it fizzled all to hell. But
The event wasn't successful. Our part in the event was very successful.
Exactly. But
El Paso's too hot.
it is. It's crazy, but so those connections it's like all of a sudden, as soon as kingdoms decide that they can pull together, it makes things great.
For me, I'd have to say the rise of Baraduin, because it was the first time that we knew that no matter how bad politics got, no matter how transitory the nature of a lot of our players were, that Amtgard would survive without El Paso being the only place where it was at. That it was something bigger than just us and our park.
I'd say the same thing. Really, the thing that always was in the back of our minds was that this was our group of friends. This was our little park. This was what we did on the weekends, and this is what we did together. To see it expand and survive outside of El Paso, and then expand from those places out to new places, and just continuing to reach more and more people. In the face of other organizations, other clubs, all kind of doing the same thing, people have a choice. They can choose those, but they've chosen Amtgard. And it carries to places, again, Okinawa, who would know? Croatia, who the hell would ever think of that? But to see that continue to grow has always been the most amazing thing to me. That something that we did for fun on a weekend has expanded so that all of you have the opportunity to share in what we loved and what we enjoyed when we were first starting. And that it continues to do that, and that people are still out there continuing to enjoy that. To me, that is the greatest contribution of all. So,
I don't know when it happened. I think it was somewhere around 10-year mark, but somebody told me membership in the club had grown to 60,000, and we were the single largest LARP in the United States. And at that moment, it was like, that's just pretty darn incredible, because there were literally in those early days that I remember being prime minister or something at that time, a records keeper, there were several events where there was only 6 of us. That's how low that the club got down to at times, so just 6 of us showing up in a park. And to grow by 10,000 times within a 10-year period is just astounding. And as Dylan said, it's just, friends being with friends and sharing stories and just getting out there and playing. I mean, it was just incredible. That was a really telltale moment. I wish I could remember the date, but it was just to have grown that much in such a short time.
So how much connection did you all have with other chapters as they formed? Now we have the whole contracting process. When did that come into being?
With Baraduin. The first contract was written with Baraduin. When Nathaniel had been an El Paso player. He was my apprentice, kind of a magician's version of a squire. And when he moved to Austin, he started an Amtgard there, and I corresponded quite a lot with him in the forming of that group because he was my apprentice. And when they said that they were going to be Amtgard, I think we called ourselves a council at the time, drafted the contract because we wanted to make sure that everyone played by the same rules. We wanted to make sure that they had a voice, but that they understood that the Burning Lands owned this material, and we wanted to hear their input, but in the final analysis, the Burning Lands was in charge of this stuff.
So I know there's debate about whether Baraduin was a kingdom or not.
It was a kingdom.
Okay.
It was recognized as a kingdom.
Okay. How did the creating new kingdom process come about? Now it's a whole vote by the circle of the other kingdoms. I'm assuming at some point you had to create an actual process.
If you had enough sign-ins, was basically how we defined group size.
Geographical, as long as it wasn't interfering with stealing or poaching players from another group. If they had the numbers.
Mm-hmm.
And when Medeth was last king, during the First Spring War, he had made promise to Dragonspine against anybody's wishes that if they successfully aided the Burning Lands in defeating Celestial Kingdom, he would grant them kingdom status. And nobody liked that idea. But they were like, well, you're king, you're honor bound. And they did. They were successful in helping Burning Lands to victory. And then Medeth wanted to back out on that deal. And the knights were pissed. And so he ended up calling for a board of directors meeting to just say, look, it's too much power for a monarch. I want to put checks and balances in play. So that was 23 years ago, where we sat in his house for 2 weeks. We had about 4 meetings in his house over the course of 2 weeks to iron out everything, to make sure that, yes, Dragonspine will be made a kingdom, and we're going to prevent one king from being desperate enough to just offer that cookie ever again. And that's when you had the rule of board of directors approval, the 150 miles, and king's approval. And that's the start of it.
So how did the Iron Mountains become an empire as opposed to a kingdom?
They chose it.
Iron Mountains.
They just chose that was their model. They were modeled on the Roman administrative model. That's actually where I got my theoretically highest title. They made me Deus Imperator, which means that when I die, I become a god. So, and thus someone started the Church of Tawnee in Dragonspine, and they would say the healing spell by the white light of Tawnee.
And Iron Mountains, they did have some guys who didn't like the power struggle, and they'd call themselves king. So there were times Moss, most notably, would call himself king.
So Tawnee, you've spoken about the Exiac experience. Syax?
Oh, Zyax.
Experience/situation at Clan being the first big test of knighthood. Would you care to talk about that?
Oh, well, there was, I used to engage in these debates with the Corsairs. The Corsairs, a lot of them came from pretty rough backgrounds, and I really didn't. And I've always been very interested in talking with people who are different than me. And so I would have a lot of philosophical discussions with Corsairs, and Zayax in particular. I had a lot of long philosophical discussions. And at one clan, he and I got into a debate on the might makes right issue. Because he believed that if you're strong, what you do is automatically right. And my counterposition was, if you're strong, you have the obligation to do right, not to define it, to do it. And we were sitting on a picnic table at Sleepy Grass, and we're just talking. And little by little, people would walk by, and they became interested in what we were saying, and they would sit down, and no one ever tried to join the conversation. They all just came and sat around till there was probably 30, 40 people all sitting around listening to us discuss this value conflict. And in the end, I argued Zayax around to my way of thinking. He agreed with me and shook my hand. We laughed. But it was just a very odd experience. Usually when people come up on a conversation they're interested in, they want to participate. But these folks just wanted to hear this debate between the two of us.
Clearly before the stabbing.
Yeah, this was before. Yeah, that was.
The two Corsairs involved in a stabbing, and we had a boy king who didn't know exactly what to do. We had there was a knights meeting long before I was a knight, and all the knights gathered around to punish these two people, and they wanted and the call was to strip them of their knighthoods because he stabbed another dude. The victim beat him up, took his credit card, and then got stitched up in Alamogordo. Yeah.
And the reason why the knights were involved is not because of one person stabbing another person, but because if he had been really seriously hurt, it could have ended the club. It could have been disastrous for the organization, and these people were both knights. So they were called upon. The knights met in the video. You can see there's a very brief clip of all the knights meeting. It's this huge. It's more than the number of people in this room standing in the big field. And the two individuals involved were in the middle, pleading their case. Well, more belligerently reflecting their case. Basically, it was their position that it was none of the knights' business. It was a matter between friends. But the knights felt differently. And so the knights, I believe that the verdict was for them to give up their belts for 6 months, but it might have been a year. But it was either 6 months. Was it 6 months? I thought it was 6 months. And both of them refused. And so someone, and I didn't see who did it, they were opposite me in the circle, took off their belt and threw it on the ground. Was it Ahira? Ahira took off his belt and threw it on the ground. And one by one, all 30, 40 knights there took off their belts and threw them on the ground and walked away.
When you're 14 years old, that is scary shit.
It was scary shit all around. I mean, you could feel the shock throughout the camp.
I know we're not supposed to peanut gallery, but I was there. And the thing that really was the most gut-wrenching for me, when I turned around and walked away, all the squires lined the field and keeping people away. And when all the belts hit the ground, all the squires took off their belts. And that was what I was doing.
And so the one who had done the stabbing, this just really affected him. And he gathered up all the belts and he went to every knight crying, saying, I'll take the punishment. I'll take any punishment you give me. Please put your belt back on. So it gives me goosebumps to talk about it. It was one of those things where what the club means meant something really, not just in lip service, not just as an idea.
So how did ideals of knighthood evolve? I know the standard of, what is required to be a knight has changed significantly. What was it in those earlier days? And what was it, when you guys were getting out after 10 years?
Well, when we started, the original rule book, if you've read that, it's quite interesting. If you won the monarchy, you got it. If you got 10
Orders of the
Lion.
Lion.
No, we invented warriors later.
Yeah, you got it. It was kind of rudimentary.
If you won champion, if you won the Monarchs tournament, or if you earned 10 orders of the Lion.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So from there, we kind of knew the club had a variety of interests, and we weren't quite satisfied with the way it laid out. And we really wanted to address or bring in everybody's interest to a certain spot. So we did take a little bit from the British monarchy and a little bit from SCA and kind of decided to kind of divest it so different sections of the group could get equal recognition. And believe me, that was a long, hard, I mean, we fought on that for, I don't know,
Long time.
Also,
3
before
years.
that, there was a expectation if you were working on Lions, if you were working on earning a knighthood, you were expected to comport yourself in a certain way in combat. If you were in a tournament and you disarmed your opponent, you waited until they picked up their weapon. If you noticed that you had maneuvered so that the sun was in your opponent's eyes, you moved. You were expected to behave honorably in all situations, in all settings. You did not hammer newbies on the open battlefield. That's the worst thing about Amtgard right now, and always has been, but I think it's worse now. But we had certain people who were spectacular fighters who were never going to be what we envisioned as a knight. And so we sat down and invented the Order of the Warrior. And the intent of Order of the Warrior was it was to be parallel with Lions. It was recognition of great fighting skills, but without all of the honorable behavior expected of people working on Lions. And a person earning 10 Orders of the Warrior would get the title Warlord, which was supposed to be equal to a knight, but separate. So that you could have fantastic fighters who didn't have the characteristics one would want from a knight. And somewhere along the way, that got lost. And I think it's sad, because I think that there are a lot of people who are wearing knight's belts who ought to be warlords, not knights.
So are you saying that lions were originally for fighting prowess as well?
They were only for fighting prowess.
Was that fighting prowess tied to holding office at that point?
No.
Or,
No.
Do you have any idea how it got to our lions today, where it's for leadership in office?
Leadership in office was supposed to be Orders of the Flame. What's the knighthood for service?
Flame.
Flame. There's another service order.
Rose and Smith.
Roses were service orders. Smiths also were service orders.
Lions were for fighting, and at some point they split them to griffins as well. Griffins ended up being the martial aspect of it. Lions ended up being the really supreme service portion of it. They were connected but separate. It just kind of, by doing that, it took away what the original intent of the lion was. More people pursued warrior as a result of that. But it still, I mean, you still reach the same points now as ever before, but the intent was kind of lost somewhere along the way.
Really, by the 10th year of Amtgard, Burning Lands had maintained the same corpora and award standard up until about 2010.
After
Oh, no,
it was
2000.
changed in first year.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
But by year 10,
But it stayed stable for a long
it had
time.
been the same for about 15 years.
Yeah.
And, depending on criticism from other kingdoms is how things have become now.
So I've heard a little bit about Garber credits versus Garber awards. Is that something that Burning Lands had a distinction between?
You received dragons if you made good garb, just like you received dragons if you made great 3D work or scrolls. Dragons was the general recognition of artistic talent.
Garber credits were originally only supposed to be a means by which to become or gain masterhood
That's right, master.
for garbers. So you had somebody that made a bunch of tunics for everybody to come out and wear as newbies. You get a Garber credit. You get enough of those, and you could be recognized as a master Garber.
And they didn't have to be nice tunics.
No.
It was
just-
a tie between art and service.
Yeah.
I'd forgotten about that.
Yeah. Just for some reason it was 12, but you still got a master for it. You still got qualified for knighthood for it. Just for whatever reason, Garbers and Smith were 12.
So that's some about the evolution of awards. What about how did the classes evolve? Like, who made those decisions? How did you all agree on those decisions? How did they evolve?
Most of us were kind of unique in the classes. Archer, where'd you go?
Wizard quite a lot,
Yeah.
paladin sometimes.
So Tawnee and I were like the first wizards, and then we had other fighters. So each of us kind of had our own specialty in the beginning.
The first classes were warrior,
Paladin,
paladin, wizard, healer, scout.
that's it.
Yeah, I don't think there were any other classes. And then
There's five.
monster class.
Barbarian.
I don't think barbarian,
barbarian was
barbarian was invented later.
That's
Yeah.
when Arn came in.
Yeah, that was
Arn
invented
came in,
later.
The barbarians came in.
Some of the classes that we have today were invented really for one person who that was their like soul.
Because again, you had a small group of people, and as people came in, the classes that we had didn't quite fit the personas that they wanted to follow.
And there weren't any levels.
So you have Arn, if anybody here remembers Arn, he ran around in his fur loincloth, and he was the epitome of a barbarian. It made perfect sense to have a barbarian. We had a gentleman who loved kind of the martial arts, so monk kind of evolved from him. You have scouts that can use bows, but we had no archer class. They just became natural developments, extensions of the classes that were there, and they became kind of sub-branches off of what we already had. And they just took on lives of their own.
And yeah, dominant personalities definitely drove it. And only one class had multiple levels, and that was wizard. It had 2 levels.
That's right.
And that's what created this whole.
Well, everybody else should have levels.
Yeah. So, I mean, wizards did have 2 levels, and then after that, everybody else wanted a progression of levels.
So we made 4 levels for everyone.
Right.
Yeah.
And then,
And then it just escalated.
right.
So how focused were you on game balance at that point versus how focused were you on, just making something that was fun?
Oh no, well, those are 2 sides of the same question. If the game isn't balanced, it isn't fun. It's only fun for the person who got the upper hand in the balance. Game balance was really important. We would play test rules. We'd put out a set of rules and say, we're going to play test this for a month. We want y'all to try to break this. And things that didn't work, we'd change.
It's a lot like the beta testing of new levels, like in Warcraft. You can determine really quick if that fireball spell is way too short, and it's like, okay, we're going to have to modify that to, 10 more seconds or something. So it was play as you go type thing. And we did pretty well at it. I mean, it adjusted pretty rapidly.
We had problems.
Because our whole goal was to have fun. We all wanted to play our
And for
dominant
everybody to have
classes.
fun.
And if somebody was just, too dominating, it's like, okay, we got to tone that back a bit or buff this up. And we adjusted pretty rapidly because at that time, we were pretty much all friends. I mean, there were always arguments, lots of Denny nights, but we balanced it out.
The real challenge isn't making a 6th level healer and a 6th level monk able to play on the same field together and have a good time. The real challenge is allowing a 6th level healer and a 1st level warrior to play on the same field and have a good time. And a lot of that was about older players would take newer players under their wings. When I would play a wizard, I would look around for somebody who I didn't know, and I would hire them to be my bodyguard, and I would give them all the enchantments they wanted so that they would be able to run into the teeth of every fight as a newbie, and their job was to keep me alive on the battlefield. So sharing was an important part of being an upper level person in your class.
So how well do you keep track of what Amtgard is doing today? Like, how does it feel looking at it from your perspective?
Frustrating.
In a lot of ways, from appearance, a lot of it's the same. But when you get into the actual play, it's so different now than 30 years ago. You can pick up a rule book your first day, look through it real quick. I can get here, I can get hit here. This is what's being shot at me, this is what's getting thrown at me. 2 or 3 pages, I could remember it, go out and play. God, you almost need to have a PhD in Amtgard just to go through the spell book. There's so much to remember that unless you're really into that particular class, you spend so much time focused on your own that keeping track of what everybody else can or can't do becomes very difficult for somebody that would be new coming in. That's the biggest difference from then till now. It's so complicated.
I haven't been out very often, but when I have dropped in on the Burning Lands, I can't remember the last time I saw them playing a battle game. It's all just stitching.
Yeah.
And basically, I've always referred to that as the Saturday afternoon Bop Your Friends Club. You know, if there's no arts or very little arts, if there's no class play, if there's no structured storytelling, then you're really just basically a street gang that wears funny costumes to hit each other with foam weapons. You know, to me, so much of the club is lost when that's all that you have in the club. And it may be a misperception because I don't go out every week, so.
So it's about time for us to wrap it up. I'd like to go through kind of closing statements for each of you with your favorite story, like that one moment that just shines on, not necessarily on the battlefield, but that kind of shaped your personal experience.
Just one story.
I know, there's so many. Where do you want us to start? At 10-year plan, I was playing with the Emerald Hills and a group from the Borderlands in Waco, Texas. And we brought a group of about 30, 40 people up, and there was a battle game. It was the undead, good, bad, and undead. Thank you.
The good, the bad, and the ugly.
I didn't really care where we ended up, but it was one of those battle games where for that one little period of time, everything that happened, you know, you're orchestrating this group of people in the context of a whole other group of people in your team. They took direction. Archers were doing what they were supposed to be doing. Spellcasters were doing what they were supposed to be doing. Everything moved like it was real. I mean, to the extent that you can make this real. But it was such a good feeling at the end of it to walk off that field and actually, this is the first time we've ever had like 1,000 people on a battlefield. And to have it act like it was something real.
Coordinated.
It was a great feeling.
Field versus Young battle was also really awesome.
Yeah.
I've been notified that we're short on time, so you have to tell your stories fast.
Okay.
Okay, I'll tell this as quick as I can. 13th reign, I'm the incoming queen, Erimithras is the incoming consort. By the way, we used consort. A regent is somebody who's in charge when the monarch is incompetent, so nobody's going to call themselves a regent while I'm king. So, unbeknownst to one another, we had both made a secret plan that our guard would show up wearing cool hats. So the consort was crowned first, and Erimithras' guard came out, and Gwyn had sewed these cool Guidos for them, Guidos for them. So they all came out strutting their stuff with their cool Guidos. Then I came up to be crowned, and we had gone to Wada's and bought these really cool musketeer hats for my guard. So my guard comes out wearing these cool musketeer hats, and JW was just Erimithras was falling all over himself going, how did you find out our secret plan? But that was actually the feast of the debunking secret plans, because it was an Oriental feast, Oriental Asian themed feast, and I had cooked most of it, but I needed to go and get dressed and get my secret guard plans put together. So I asked my, at that time, squire, or maybe former squire Theo, who is also the Guildmaster of Assassins, but was studying culinary arts, to finish up the feast for me while I went and got ready. So I've been crowned, we're getting ready to eat the feast, and I say, you know, I asked the Guildmaster of Assassins to finish the feast for me, so just for safety's sake, I'd like to ask the Guildmaster of Healers to bless the food. So the Guildmaster of Healers went and blessed the food, and it was really a little joke, except I found out later that Theo had poisoned the food. He thought one of the members of the Assassin's Guild had ratted him out, so he butchered them all that night.
One of my favorite personal memories, we had a comrade, his name was Guy, and he had spent the whole day trying to organize his company so that they would march in column And he was very adamant they must march in column, and he was at the head of the column. And I was just playing assassin, and I was just kind of laying in the weeds, and they marched by me. They didn't see me, so I stood up and marched behind them. And slowly, 2 by 2, I took out the entire column, and then I'm marching behind Guy, and he turns around, all right, squad! And he's like, and I just was laughing so hard, I just let him kill me at that point. And he stood at the top of the hill, and then he had to go back down, so.
2009. I had already been up to Minnesota because one of my buddies wanted help to try and turn the then principality into a kingdom there. And man, it was hard. But I took 2 buddies to clan with me. And on that, we had a great time. There were some different battle games. And on the way home, it clicked with one of my buddies. And he says, man, we should run an event like that and just show all the people what the fun stuff they just missed. And it was like, tell you what, if you boys will do the work, I'll spearhead it. We had 52 people on an event we promoted for 9 months. But during that whole time, we're showing everybody, how do you promote? How do you get things so everybody can come? And 52 doesn't seem like a lot. 5 years later, we had 250. And it was just all the idea of, we're going to show this, how it's done. And people came, they had a blast, they told their friends. And it's really just escalating up in Polaris, and I couldn't be happier.
Thank you all very much. I really appreciate this. If we could have a round of applause for all of our panelists.